This is a brief presentation about Dante Alighieri, one of the world's greatest writers. The Middle Ages. The Roman Empire dominated Europe for almost 500 years. After the fall of Rome in 476 AD, Europe broke into separate kingdoms and empires. This period in European history, the time after the fall of Rome until about 1350, is called the Middle Ages. So you have the ancient world, the Middle Ages, and then the Renaissance. Dante Alighieri. One of the greatest writers the world has ever known, the man we call Dante, lived during the late Middle Ages. Dante's ideas helped to usher in the Renaissance. Many consider his work, The Divine Comedy, the greatest piece of literature of all time. A Florentine. Dante was born in Florence, Italy in 1265. Dante's father made a good living renting property in the city of Florence. His mother came from a wealthy family. Florence was one of the richest of the Italian city-states. During this time, it was filled with political intrigues and military conflicts. Dante's education. Dante started school when he was about 7 years old. He studied mathematics, Latin, and logic. Schools at that time were small, damp, and very crowded. But Dante's education was not limited to the classroom. Florence was a busy and growing city. Dante learned many things just by talking to the people he met on the streets of Florence. We know this because in his writing he makes many references to the different groups of people who lived in Florence during his childhood. In exile. As a young man, Dante served as both a Florentine soldier and statesman. He spoke out against corruption in the Roman Catholic Church and the political fighting that he saw in Florence. Not everyone agreed with the positions he took. In 1301, his enemies forced him into exile. For the next 30 years, Dante lived in several Italian cities, including the city of Ravenna. Dante began writing the Divine Comedy in 1307. The poem is set in the year 1300 and tells the story of Dante's imaginary journey as he travels through the afterlife in the Inferno, which we call hell, Purgatorio, which we refer to as purgatory, and Paradiso, which we would know as heaven. A journey through the afterlife. In the poem, Dante travels through the 3 levels of the afterlife. He goes first to hell, a place Christians believe very sinful people go after they die. Then he visits purgatory, a place where some Christians believe people go for a little while after their death to atone for their sins. Finally, he goes to heaven. The Divine Comedy and Salvation. One purpose of Dante's work was to describe what happened to human souls after their death. Another purpose was to explain how people could be saved from sin. Because the church was central in almost everyone's life during the Middle Ages, salvation was very important to people. Inside literature. The Divine Comedy covers 7 days. It is written in 3 parts, which are called cantos. These parts are the Inferno, hell, Purgatorio, purgatory, and Paradiso, heaven. Dante wrote the Divine Comedy in Italian, which was unusual at that time. During that period, most works of literature were written in Latin, which was the common language of scholars. Dante invented a rhyming pattern called terza rima for the Divine Comedy. It's a very complicated, very difficult rhyme scheme. So let's take a quick quiz. How closely were you paying attention? Write your answers down on a piece of paper. In what city was Dante born? What did Dante study in school? Why was Dante exiled? Why was he forced to leave his home city-state? Number 4, in what part of the Divine Comedy would you read about Dante's visit to hell? There are 3 parts of the Divine Comedy. Which part would be about his visit to hell? And 5th, Latin was the common language of scholars during the Middle Ages. Is there a common language of scholars today? Explain your answer. I'll give you a few minutes to write down your answers to these questions. Do 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 do. Okay, let's check your answers. Dante was born in Florence. It was one of the rich city-states in northern Italy. He studied Latin, logic, and mathematics in school. And why was he exiled? Because his enemies didn't agree with the positions he took. He spoke out about corruption in the church, and also about political infighting in Florence. And in what part of the Divine Comedy would you read about Dante's visit to hell? The answer would be the Inferno. That's hell. Now, you may have different answers about to number 5. I think many people would argue that English is the common language of scholars today. That's the language in which most scholarly publications are now being published. But we can discuss that at another time. Hope you enjoyed this presentation on Dante Alighieri.